So just a short overview for those of you who don't know me. I'm Lesa Bradshaw. I'm from a company called Bradshaw LeRoux Consulting, and we're very engaged in promoting the inclusion of all sorts of diversity, but principally the form of disability as a form of diversity. So a lot of the work that we do is we initially actually started many years ago as industrial psychologists, and because I'm a wheelchair user, our clients kept saying, oh, we've seen you disabled, we have to hire other disabled people, do you know anybody? And I would say, well, no, we don't generally hang in flocks, but let me see what I can do, and I'll try and put the right talent, you know, in touch with you. And I opened a recruitment agency back in 2008 now that was intentionally positioned to try and connect talent with a disability to the workplace. What we soon discovered is all the barriers to inclusion were very much still there. And so most of the work that I now do is very much around unlocking the economy to be accessible for persons with a disability, and also working with organizations to shift their cultures so that they get to realize the value that this form of diversity brings to business. The long-term goal is to make sure that disability is normalized to the point where it's given equal recognition as just another form of diversity that breeds innovation and benefit to business overall. One of the main ways to do that is through making sure that we create an accessible culture and environment. And so I've been asked to speak on the topic of reasonable accommodation, because I think, you know, and I think it's very true that it's very seldom that I come across a client that really doesn't want to do disability inclusion. Most organizations very much do want to do it, and they can see that it's something, they know that they've got a compliance pressure to do so. So there's a push factor. But from a pull factor, nobody really wants to actively discriminate against persons with disabilities. It really comes down to the fear of we cannot accommodate this form of diversity into our business, or we don't understand it and therefore would rather not tackle it, or it's a big ask or a big task. So we don't really have the budget or, you know, the resources to tackle it. And I often find it's reflected in the way we tend to have like seasonal interest in disability inclusion. And where it comes to the crunch, everybody gets out there, they dust off their objectives, and the boardrooms sit down and they go, we're going to include people with disabilities. And everyone goes, yes, yes, we'll do it. And then other stuff becomes priorities and gets put back on the shelf, and then it gets pulled out and dusted off at BE reporting season. So what we always try and explain to people is disability inclusion happens around the coffee machine. It happens in small bite-sized chunks. It happens in small shifts that we make as we transition towards normalizing this form of diversity. And reasonable accommodation is where we generally can start with these conversations. Okay. What's quite interesting is when I did my MBA thesis on disability inclusion strategies in the South African organizations, one of the biggest pushbacks from organizations was we don't have budgets to go and make our work environments accessible to all. And what was so interesting is most reasonable accommodation shifts don't cost a penny. Okay, so if we can just go, I want to go through talking around some of the dynamics. The first thing is to say, what is reasonable accommodation? Now, this is the definition that's been given to you by Code of Good Practice and the labor legislation. It's any modification or adjustment to a job or to the working environment that will enable a person from a designated group to have access to or participate in employment. Okay, so it doesn't actually speak specifically around disability. It's around designated groups. Okay, so let's have a look at how we've done this in the past. What about when organizations started to open up extended work hours and inclusion of women in the workplace, women who happen to be the ones that have children? They started to have creches opening on site. They started to have flexible work opportunities or flexible work times to give parents opportunities to fetch and drop kids and so on. They had the virtual office so that people could work from home if they've got kids and they're doing homeschooling, and they've also got to get work done, and we've seen more of that over the last year than ever before. They had male and female change rooms so that people could get changed in comfort in the various organizations and so on. So we've been doing reasonable accommodation for a very long time. Okay, we've just been doing it in a different conversation because we are much more exposed to the diversity of gender, to the diversity of parenting, to the diversity of being single, being married, having kids, not having kids. All of that is normalized, okay? So our ability to adjust to reasonable accommodation gets done quicker in these other areas of diversity because we can relate more to it. Disability traditionally has been kept very segregated. It's been kept in the special section over there. And so we're not used to thinking logically and thinking flexibly and just thinking rationally about how to make an adjustment or a shift or a change to level the playing field so that a person with a disability can compete. Okay, and in a nutshell, that's what reasonable accommodation asks. Now, I don't really like the word reasonable because I think it comes down to, well, who gets to decide that? What is a better way of, a better terminology is to say, what workplace adjustments are needed to take a disabling factor away that might hamper the performance of an otherwise excellent employee? Okay, so what disables you as a single parent? Well, you've got to work, but you've also got to look after your kids. So you've got to have a plan that takes that disabling factor away. What disables a person that's a wheelchair user? Well, steps and transport and accessible bathrooms. Okay, so what can we do within reason to take that away so that the person can produce and perform? This is just logic. Okay, applied to disability, we get a bit twitchy as employers because we think it's going to be, we've got to go and make our entire factory wheelchair accessible, or we've got to make everything 100% open and accessible to every type of disability. And that is not what reasonable accommodation is. Okay, I want to show this fantastic video clip, which is one of my favorite video clips because it really flips thinking around what disables people and what is reasonable accommodation. So I'm going to play it. If for some reason the sound doesn't come through, can I just ask Dineshri, can I just ask you to pop up and just tell me? Okay.
Sure, no problem.
Imagine a town full of physically impaired people, all wheelchair users. They run everything. There aren't any able-bodied people, so naturally, when they built the town, the community decided it was pointless to have ceilings 10 foot high and doors 7 foot high. So the ceilings were built at 7 foot and the doors at 5 foot. In every way, they designed the place the way they wanted it. One day, a few able-bodied people come to stay. One of the first things they notice is the height of the doors. And the reason they notice is because they keep hitting their heads. They come to stand out by the bruises they carry on their foreheads. Soon doctors, psychiatrists and social workers all become involved. Committees are formed. Many people are worried about what becomes known as the problem of the able-bodied. Throughout the town there is a growth of real concern. Specially toughened helmets are handed out, free to the able-bodied, to be worn at all times. Braces are designed which give support and relief, while keeping the able-bodied wearer bent to normal height. Various groups of compassionate wheelchair users get together and form registered charities. Every quarter they have a collection day. Upturned helmets are left in pubs and shops for people to drop their small change into. There is talk of founding special homes. But then one day, it dawns on the able-bodied that there is nothing actually wrong with them, just that society excludes them.
So I hope you're all able to hear that, but I think that is such a cheeky way to look at what reasonable accommodation is. Here's what it comes down to. When we built our work environment, when we built our economy, we didn't include the needs of diverse people in building that economy. So what happens is it was traditionally built for a certain designation or demographic. Then as that demographic started to change and different types of diversity started to enter the workplace, so we needed to start to shift and adjust and to share, okay? Some examples I've given of, broadly speaking, are around how we had to adjust to gender, how we had to adjust to different socioeconomic levels of people coming in, to different ages of people coming into the organization. And this tended to happen organically. When it comes to disability, what we tend to focus on is we tend to focus on, well, what assistive device does this person need? And can we reasonably have that in our business? So if you're visually impaired, we'll get you voice recognition software, we'll get you the JAWS software, we'll get you larger screens, larger font. That's an assistive device. Is it in our budget to go and spend 5,000 Rand to buy a larger screen? No, it's not. Well, therefore we can't hire this person, okay? Other things, is it reasonable to give flexible working hours because somebody with a disability who's mobility impaired might require a lift from other people to get to and from work? Or can we allocate shift times to allow some people with disabilities, let's just say somebody who's got a disability where they have to take strong medication to manage their disability, but it impairs their concentration. So you can't put them on shift just after they've taken that medication. So can we put them on those 2 shifts during the day and not that 3rd shift? That allows them to work the same number of shifts as anybody else, but not putting them in danger. Now, I want to quickly make a cheeky point here. Before COVID, having virtual offices, having flexible working hours, having the option to work from home was absolutely seen as a no-no for many companies, because the standard way of people doing work was to come to the working environment, to come to the workplace and to do the work, okay? And often we'd get candidates who were great candidates, but they couldn't get the job because they didn't have reliable transport to get to and from work, okay? So it wasn't reasonable to allow them to work from home because that's not how the company did business. Into COVID, and all of a sudden it's become common practice. So now it's considered to be very reasonable in terms of being flexible in the way work and business is done. Okay, so it just shows you sometimes what's needed. And most of the times when it comes to reasonable accommodation, yes, it might include assistive devices. But that's no different than us budgeting for getting laptops and Windows instead of the old DOS PCs that we used to wear or used to use. So assistive devices are one thing. Flexibility and thinking around how the job is done, how the work outputs are achieved, where the workplace is. All of those are things that you need to look flexibly at. Evacuation and safety. Have we thought about reasonably accommodating or making workplace adjustments to allow people with disabilities to get out of the workplace safely? And again, that becomes very important because when you're recruiting people with disabilities, often a pushback from line manager is, yeah, but it's just not safe for somebody with epilepsy to work in our area because they could hurt themselves if they have a seizure. And yes, that's true. However, if you have a look at your health and safety policies, if you look at reasonably accommodating individuals, you'll see that in many cases, somebody with epilepsy, whatever triggers their seizures is not present in that work environment. Or they might have seizures from time to time, but they can feel a seizure coming on with plenty of opportunity to be able to get out the work environment. So if we reasonably accommodate for people who might have disabling factors that get in the way of them being employed, and we start to think around, well, how can we adjust the way we do things? How can we shift on our policies? How can we change our environment to be more inclusive? Then we start to become a lot more flexible in terms of when we leveling the playing field so that people can compete. Okay, our work environments and conditions. One of the things that we had an interesting conversation the other day because we had somebody with epilepsy who was going to be working in a certain area, but they're very temperature sensitive. And they were going, well, we don't have aircon in this area and it gets quite hot. And this person is temperature sensitive. And we were like, that's absolutely fine. So all we need to do is we need to get them like one of those little fans that you put ice water in the back and it blows cold air. And on extremely hot days, that person can use that fan. I can tell you we put that in place and that is the most popular workstation to be on a hot summer's day. Everybody finds reasons to go and visit this person. Okay, so there's ways we can do pockets of adjustments. We don't need to go and put air conditioning throughout the entire factory or organization or office block. Flexing on procedures and policies, very much a critical issue right now, especially when you look at the big demand versus supply problem. There is a huge demand for talent with a disability to enter the workforce. There is a very short supply of talent that comes packaged in the way you want it. So when we say a minimum matric for our learnership programs, for our entry-level positions, for some of the jobs that we're advertising or vacancies that we've got, ask yourself, if only 6% of kids with a disability who are going through the special needs schooling system are getting a matric, and yet so many have vocational skills and talents and learn skills to bring to business, what is disabling us? It's the policy of a matric minimum. It's not the person's inability to perform in the job. We've got a candidate that's a welder and he's an outstanding welder, but you think we can get him placed? No, because he doesn't have a matric minimum because of a learning disability. So when it comes, you don't have to flex on policies and say that you don't need a matric minimum for every position or you don't need a matric minimum for every person with a disability that applies. But you have to think rationally. If what is disabling this individual in this job is the matric minimum policy, is it reasonable to flex on this matric minimum in this particular circumstance? Because the disabling factor is the policy. Otherwise, you've got great talent coming to a vacancy that needs that talent. Okay, so we've got to start thinking differently. What I also would like to very strongly position is that we need to start thinking about universal design. Okay, disability is a human condition that everybody is going to experience at some point in their life journey, be it temporary, be it permanent, be it now, or be it where you're older. We are all going to experience something disabling, and all of us experienced it during lockdown. Okay, and if we have a look now at the trends, a lot more people that have been struggling to quietly cope with non-visible disabilities by themselves are now having to speak out and saying, actually, I cannot cope and I need support. So when we start thinking about assisting or adjusting or accommodating the diversity of disability on a case-by-case basis, and as we grow our business and as we build new offices and as we put new policies in place, if we start to think inclusively, what we inadvertently do is we start accommodating adjustments for everybody. Imagine prior COVID, we had been open to allowing accessible or flexible work environments. So you can work from home. You can have assistive technology that will help you work from home. We have a policy on connectivity. If all of that was in place, it would have helped us a lot in responding to the COVID dynamic. For Evac, that's me actually. This particular story was quite interesting. I met a new client that had got somebody with brittle bone syndrome. So they used either crutches or wheelchairs, but also you had to kind of treat them quite gently because they had quite weak bones. And so this person, they had been employed by the company up on the 13th story of the building, and everything was good. They went and they did the tick box. So they said, have we got an evac chair? Yes. And they put it on that floor. And they said, super. We've got the evac chair. The person can come and work with us and we're all good. Then what happened is they had a fire drill. Now, the problem was nobody knew how to work the evac chair, firstly. Secondly, the safety officer on that floor was a tiny little person who didn't have the strength to actually open the evac chair and assist that person into it. Thirdly, the candidates had a look at this evac chair and said, there's no ways I'm going down 26 flights of stairs in that thing, because by the time I come out the bottom, I'm going to have every broken bone in my body because it's a metallic, clunky structure. And then they were trying to make her get in, and she was refusing, and it was blocking the stairwell, and there was big drama, and she was embarrassed, and everybody was embarrassed, and it was just a nightmare. And we came in and we said, in all honesty, reasonable accommodation is just a conversation. So take a breath. Firstly, yes, you've got an evac chair. That's great. So when we're in a non-emergency situation, let's make sure that everybody on the floor and the floor above and the floor below knows how to operate it, because it's not just going to be her that's going to need to use it. What about a heavily pregnant woman? What about a guy with a football injury? What about a woman who's done has a sporting injury or overdid the gym and can't get down 26 flights of stairs? This will benefit everybody. What about somebody who's having a panic attack and is not responding to you, and you have to get them out the building? The evac chair will help them. So if everybody knows how to operate an evac chair, and if it's been tailored, so what we did is we got pool noodles and padding. I mean, we literally turned this evac chair into like a little armchair thing for her. And we practiced when there was no drama and there was no emergency. And eventually it became a finely oiled machine. And everybody knew how to use this assistive device. This is how we've got to start thinking about disability inclusion and about reasonable accommodation and workplace adjustment. Every little thing that we do is going to end up benefiting everybody at some point. So it's not a special treatment for the disabled. It's not a reasonable gesture that you're going to put in place to the benefit. It's to the benefit of everyone. I was laughing the other day because I was watching some of my staff. They'd been on some fitness thing and they all came back and they couldn't walk up a flight of stairs. It was ridiculous because they'd done legs the day before and their legs were so stiff that they were all wobbly and they couldn't get up the stairs. And I was laughing and I was going, thank goodness we've got a ramp, because you can all shuffle yourselves up that ramp and it's going to be accommodating to you too.